For part 2 of this month's studio vlog,
Hey.
I'm going to let you watch things that have been happening over the second half of June while I talk about how I price my artwork. If you want to see more behind the scenes, you can check out any of my previous studio vlogs. Remember, I'm not an expert, and whatever advice you gain from this video, take with a grain of salt. If you don't know me, I've been a full-time artist for over 6 years, focusing on painting landscapes mostly, and I have a bit of a weird backstory with my art career, or maybe it's not weird, but it's different. Honestly, I don't know what's normal these days, so anyways, let's just get started. I started painting in 2015. And I was streaming full-time on Twitch. And most of my income came from random generosity of my viewers, either through donations or subscriptions, which is the norm on Twitch. It's also important to mention that for the first year I was doing art full-time and streaming, I was also still doing wedding and portrait photography. So that income supplemented my needs. But after that first year, I was 100% into my art career and streaming. So in that first year, I was painting a lot, and I mean tons of art. Since I was streaming around 30 to 40 hours per week, that whole time of streaming was filled with creating art. And that first year, I think I ended up with over 300 paintings or something like that. So the more I painted, the more my viewers started to be interested in purchasing my artwork. And I was like, awesome, I don't want this stuff piling up everywhere. Please buy it for next to nothing. So I was selling small canvases, watercolors, and drawings, anywhere from $20 to $100 or so. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. But something to note is that during that first year, financially, I didn't need art sales to make ends meet. I was doing that through streaming income and my photography at the time. So selling art was just a bonus for me, and I didn't think about pricing that much. But one day, an artist I really looked up to and respected said, "Sarah, what are you doing? You are completely underselling and devaluing your hard work. And it's kind of a joke how little you're charging." And that completely stopped me in my tracks. Katie, break. Honestly, before that, I had barely given a thought to pricing. I just basically wanted to be compensated for my materials and shipping costs. I didn't really care much beyond that. And during that first year, my focus was much more about learning and growing. So I barely considered myself a real artist yet. I was definitely a streamer first and an artist second. So when that artist said that to me, it kind of woke me up a little bit. Like, wow, okay, if this is going to be my future, I really need to start thinking about this. Then came the task of, okay, how do I actually choose a price range? How do I calculate what my time is worth? And I actually Googled that, and the results varied wildly, as you might expect. People suggested pricing per square inch and pricing based on the time that was spent painting. And so after Googling for a while, I still had no clue where to start. But one day when I was streaming, I was painting a larger, maybe like 2 foot by 3 foot painting. And one of my viewers said they wanted to buy it. And I was like, okay, $600. Like totally random, pulled the number out of thin air. And I remember a few people in chat were like, wow, really? Oh, that's so expensive. But a few people in chat were like, yeah, that's actually still kind of underpriced based on how much time you've been painting this. And the person that wanted to buy it, they said, sold. And within a day, they had paid my PayPal invoice and I had $600 in my bank account. And that was a turning point for me. Side note, please remember to give the video a thumbs up so that YouTube knows I deserve a promotion. So that $600 painting, I ended up spending around 30 hours on it. So if I actually break that down, it's around $20 per hour. And for a new artist, someone who was just learning and figuring out how to put paint on canvas, that felt pretty darn good. And the more I thought about it, the more I liked that idea of charging per hour. It seemed really fair, and it also was very easy for a buyer to understand value in that way because almost everyone on Earth is compensated that way. The tricky part with charging per hour is that different paintings take different amounts of time. I'm very fast with some mediums versus others, so I needed to come up with a way to distinguish those values. That's where being self-aware and focused really comes into play. It takes time and repetition to get a feel for how quickly or slowly you paint. I started tracking my time very carefully. I kept a little notebook by my desk and just wrote down everything anytime I worked on a painting. But one of my biggest mistakes at first is that my business was growing very quickly and I was buying supplies left and right, and I wasn't keeping track of that. I wasn't keeping track of the supplies that I was buying. I was one of those business owners who was scrambling a few days before tax day to do a year's worth of bookkeeping. So every time I needed to price a painting, I had to dig through my receipts to figure out how much the canvas or materials cost and make sure that I factored that in. So yeah, little tip, keep track of your supplies. Keep a spreadsheet or something. Just make it super easy to find. Over time, I realized that based on material costs and my sales history, I had a base price of what I could be charging. So between the materials and the time spent painting, I knew that my base was never going to be below $100. So if I was streaming and working on a watercolor, for instance, and someone asked me how much it is to buy it, I could safely say it will start at 100 and depend on how much time I put into this. It was very fluid at that time. And honestly, it still kind of is these days, but we'll get into that later. But it really felt good knowing that I had a base number to start with. So remember back to that first big sale, the $600 painting, and I said I broke it down to $20 an hour. Well, a bunch of artists that I looked up to told me they never charge less than $40 per hour because their skill is a specialty skill. Our skills as artists are specialty. And if you look at a specialty trade, you'll find that $40 per hour is pretty standard, if not cheap. A specialty trade is anything that requires some kind of expertise in something specific. So not just anyone can walk through the door and do that job. But at that time, I did feel okay with the $20 per hour because, again, I was just starting my painting career and I felt like a total beginner. I was uncomfortable charging more than that because I was still having a lot of firsts as an artist, like painting my first mountain or my first river or whatever. But a couple years in, there came a point when I was selling almost every painting I was making. And of course, that felt amazing because I had stopped doing photography and I really needed that extra income to balance things out. So I was more than happy to sell my work at a lower cost if it meant that I could continue doing art full time. Beautiful drone break. that went on for a couple years. And I knew I was on the lower side of pricing, but I was also in a very, very difficult financial situation. Not only did I have my student loans and bills and all of that stuff, but I was also in the process of moving to Scotland. Paying for the visa alone was thousands of dollars, let alone travel and moving expenses. So I was trying to find a balance of selling enough work to survive, but not undervalue myself too much. And that was really tricky. So at that time, most of my buyers were still my stream viewers. And so if I was working on a painting and someone was like, hey, how much is this one? I love it. I really want to buy it. I would tell them the base price and then mention, of course, depending on how much time goes into it, it'll go up from there. And if they were like, oh, okay, well, my limit is like 200, I would make sure I fit within that 200 to sell the painting because I needed the money at that time. So I was very flexible and it was very fluid. I was making a lot of my pricing up on the fly and I was just doing my best to survive. So after I moved to Scotland and I was slowly recovering from all of that financial crisis, I was trying to slowly increase my prices. So anything over a 9 by 12 inch painting, I used a base price of $150 because after time and materials and my slowly increasing expertise went into it, 150 was a very fair price. And what I realize in retrospect is that a lot of my success with sales depended directly on what type of audience I had or how I was advertising myself. So stream is technically an advertisement. Like I'm streaming artwork live. Anyone who's watching is watching the process. And most of the time, if you watch the process of how something is made, you have a deeper understanding of it and you put a little more value on it because you realize how hard it is. But on Twitch in general, the audience is a little bit younger and they might not have as much disposable income. And so in order for me to sell enough on Twitch, I had to stream like constantly. And that was kind of clashing with what I wanted to do as an artist and my personal life. So I was slowly trying to reduce my stream. And during that transitional time, my audience definitely shifted. That shift from an engaged, enthusiastic stream viewer to pretty much strangers who found me on Etsy or Google or Instagram was a slow transition, but it was pretty noticeable to me. I started to realize I didn't know who my buyers were. People would contact me out of the blue through email and say, oh, I saw this painting on Instagram or this on your blog and I really want to buy it. And I was like, oh, awesome. And around that time, I was also starting to focus more on YouTube, and I was showing a lot of behind the scenes footage of how I create my art and talking about it a little bit more in depth. And while that is sort of similar to streaming, it was more of like an educational or informative thing. And for some reason, that shift seemed to bring in buyers who were pretty much willing to pay any price I named. Obviously, I wasn't saying like, ridiculously high prices because otherwise I never would have sold anything. But I was definitely charging what I felt was very fair and the buyers were more than happy to pay that. And I think it's because they saw the behind the scenes stuff. They saw the hard work and consideration that goes into a painting. And hearing more about my thoughts rather than just watching me do it live and talking about cats. In retrospect, I do think I was charging still more on the lower end, but it seemed to be on the higher side for my buyers. And I think that's kind of a good place to be when your prices are on the higher end of the spectrum for your existing audience. It means you won't sell everything, but when you do sell a piece, you are very fairly compensated. But the key, of course, is to find the right audience. And that changes throughout your career. As you grow as an artist, your audience will shift. And if you start doing more educational content, your audience will shift. So it's going to change throughout, depending on what you're doing. But I personally find the only thing that works for me is to make sure I have multiple sources of income. I don't rely on selling paintings or commissions to make a living. I can name a price I think is fair and not worry whether it sells immediately. But if I ever found myself in a dire financial situation, I would not feel bad at all doing a sale or finding a way to make ends meet. I know I have this specialty skill and I can figure out a way to make a living with it. When it comes down to it, my thoughts about pricing are do what you need to do to survive and find a way to keep doing what you love for a living. And again, it's going to shift a lot throughout your artistic career. But we have a specialty skill. Don't undervalue it. It's a lot of trial and error and it takes a long time, but it's going to be worth the effort. I promise. Okay, so that's it for now. I may talk about this more in a future vlog or something, but I hope this little bit of insight helps you along in your journey. If you feel like chatting about it in the comments or have any questions, just let me know. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Take care.